Tune into Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
This society needs a spectacle. It might help us to see some need.
On A View from the Outside this week being the 26th of February 2022, we look at Spare a Thought, 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 and we ask Vincentians everywhere, and especially those living at home in St Vincent and the Grenadines, to spare a thought for the people who have been disadvantaged, including the people of the Ukraine, whose country has been invaded on the order of Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. The Macmillan Dictionary states that to spare a thought is to think about someone who is in a difficult situation. And the Collins Dictionary states that if you spare a thought for an unfortunate person, you make an effort to think sympathetically about them. These definitions tell us that to spare a thought for someone is to recognize that that someone is in a difficult situation. To spare a thought for someone is to recognize that that someone is in an unfortunate position. To spare a thought for someone is to make an effort to offer sympathy and to think sympathetically about them. It is in keeping with these definitions and taking into account the dire situation facing the Ukrainian people, and also not forgetting those who are disadvantaged and in dire straits at home in St Vincent and the Grenadines, that we, on A View from the Outside, ask you to spare a thought for others today. The world watched as President Putin, the Russian president, for weeks flexed his political power and muscle and eventually ordered the invasion of Ukraine in the early hours of Thursday, the 24th of February 2022. While the Ukrainian people generally, including their president, Vladimir Zelensky, former world heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko, and ex-Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, and others, remain defiant and have vowed to stay and defend their country and protect their people. The sad sight of tens of thousands of people, mainly women and children, trying to leave the Ukraine to get to safety is seen on television around the world. Many shed tears regarding the uncertainty which they and their country face. It is those sights, compared with the unjustified actions of the Russian president, which evoke emotions and reactions from many around the world. Many countries, organizations, and individuals are in solidarity with the people of the Ukraine as they spare a thought for them. There are even Russians in Russia who are not happy with their president's action, and they too take the time to spare a thought for their Ukrainian neighbors. Many world leaders have condemned President Putin's stance and have condemned the invasion of Ukraine. Many have expressed grave concern that the Russian invasion of Ukraine could spark the biggest war since World War II in 1945. Countries including members of the European Union, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, Canada, and many other countries around Europe and elsewhere have already imposed heavy sanctions on the Russian government and institutions. Sporting organizations, including UEFA, the governing body for football in Europe, has taken action. The European Champions League, the biggest football competition in Europe, which was scheduled to be played in the Russian city of St. Petersburg on the 28th of May 2022, has already been moved to Paris in France. Manchester United, one of the biggest clubs in Europe, has ended its long-term sponsorship deal with the Russian airline Aeroflot. Many other sporting bodies and other organizations, legal and otherwise, have not remained silent, but have also reacted with strong condemnation of the action taken by the Russian president. The leaders of the bar in the United Kingdom and Ireland have not remained silent. They have come together and issued a strongly worded joint statement in condemnation of Russia's attack on Ukraine. In that statement, they unequivocally condemned the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. They said Ukraine is a sovereign state entitled to self-determination, and that international law requires the Russian Federation to respect Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. And they go on to say that this act of war is a gross violation of international law as set out in the UN Charter. In the Caribbean, Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Barbados, publicly declared that the government of Barbados is gravely concerned by the actions taken by the authorities of the Russian Federation. And she goes on to say, the actions of the Russian Federation are a violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and the rule of non-interference in the international affairs of another state. They are a violation of the prohibition of threat or use of force. The Caribbean Community CARICOM also issued a statement in strong condemnation of the Russian attack on Ukraine. Other Caribbean leaders have done the same. That is the kind of response which the action of Russia on Ukraine has evoked around the world. And whilst all of that is happening, the Vincentian people, whom we here on A View from the Outside ask to spare a thought for the people of Ukraine, eagerly await a public response from the regime which occupies the seat of government in the country. The same regime which not long ago boasted publicly about having established diplomatic relations with Russia. The same regime which boasted publicly that it negotiated visa waiver for Vincentians who wish to travel to Russia. The same regime whose head stated publicly that Russia and St Vincent and the Grenadines share the same value or values. So, whilst people are dying and the international community is vociferous and speaking out about the atrocities perpetrated by Russia on Ukraine, the Vincentian regime and its head seem to be whimpering away in silence. Instead of making a public statement, perhaps mirroring that of his Bajan counterpart, Mia Mottley, the head of the regime, is reported to have said that he sent a private letter to the Russian president. People are now asking, how come his penchant for publicity is evading him at this time? Now is the time when Vincentians want him to speak publicly on the issue, not to purportedly bury his thoughts away in a private letter to the president of Russia. Vincentians, while all of this is happening, we, here on A View from the Outside, continue to urge you to spare a thought for the people of Ukraine. We ask you also to spare a thought for Vincentians in Russia. Spare a thought for Vincentian students who are there. As you spare a thought for those caught up in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, we urge you also not to abandon those in our country who are experiencing difficult and unfortunate situations brought about by the regime in the country. We ask you to spare a thought for them also. Spare a thought for Yogi Farrell, that young, promising Vincentian woman who suffered at the hands of the regime to the point of destruction. She suffered at their hands and the hands of their agents and enablers. Spare thought for Yogi Farrell. Spare a thought for Bigger Biggs, the local businessman who has been lynched and decapitated economically, and his multi-million-dollar sand mining business destroyed completely and left in ruins. Spare a thought for him as he battles daily for more than a decade now to try to obtain compensation from the regime for the wicked act which they inflicted on him and his business. Spare a thought for Marcus de Freitas, who continues to suffer without compensation for his property, which the regime compulsorily acquired over a decade and a half ago, and for which they continue to disobey a court order to compensate him. Spare a thought for all those landowners who continue to suffer without compensation years after their land was taken away from them by the regime. Spare a thought for the farmers and fisherfolk from the North Leeward, Richmond area who have been completely disrespected in relation to the quarry project which is being established there. Spare a thought for the hundreds of teachers, police officers, nurses, doctors, and other public servants who were wickedly fired and put on the breadline by the regime simply for having not bowed to their mandate to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Spare a thought for the thousands up and down the country who live in extreme poverty, while a select few live in opulence and extravagance, and while $95 million disappeared completely from the nation's purse. Spare a thought for the entire nation of St Vincent and the Grenadines, who have continually been lied to by members of the regime. Vincentians, we encourage you not to harden your hearts. We encourage you to be sympathetic to those less fortunate. We implore you to spare a thought for those who will be buoyed by your kindness. As you do that, we encourage you to think of the words of the late American civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Vincentians, spare thought. Until next week, this is Brereton Horne with a reminder to send your feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. We also invite you to visit and like our Facebook page at A View from the Outside, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel at JMB Horne. Have a pleasant Saturday, all. Have a wonderful Sunday, and have a productive week ahead as we all spare a thought for the people of the Ukraine and for those in our own country. All the best to you, Justin, and the listeners.